Dr. Garrick assured us that a visit to the hospital was a harmless diversion, a moral lesson on the fragility of the human mind suitable for ladies and gentlemen of quality. Then I saw a woman gnawing on the iron bars of her cell until her teeth splintered, while the crowd behind me applauded her fervor. If you enjoy exploring the dark corners of medical history where science and cruelty intersect, please subscribe to the channel. We uncover the archives they tried to burn. Now, let us step into the gallery. I remember the sound of the penny hitting the bottom of the admission box more than the screams. It was a singular, metallic clink that echoed in the stone foyer of Moorfields. That copper coin was the price of a soul in 1794. My fiancée, Elizabeth, held her scented handkerchief to her nose, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and delight. Behind us, the Easter Monday crowd surged, tradesmen, apprentices, and aristocrats alike, jostling for position as if entering a bear-baiting pit or a theater. We were not here to cure. We were here to stare. The heavy oak doors groaned open, and the air rushed out to meet us. A thick, physical wall of stench composed of unwashed bodies, rotting straw, and the sharp copper tang of old blood. It coated the back of my throat instantly, a taste I would not be able to wash away with the finest claret later that evening. Lord Wessingham, a pleasure. Dr. Edmund Garrick bowed low, his wig meticulously powdered, contrasting sharply with the stains on the cuffs of his coat. You have come at a fortuitous time. The moon is waning, and the patients in the 4th ward are particularly spirited. I gripped my cane, the gold head cool against my palm. We wish to see the incurables, Garrick. My guests have tired of the melancholics. Of course, my lord. The public galleries are crowded today, but for a man of your standing, we shall take the private corridor. He gestured with a hand that had likely shackled a human being hours prior. But I must warn the ladies, do not reach through the bars. The beasts bite. But the beasts he spoke of were once men and women who sat at dinner tables, played the pianoforte, and held their children. We moved into the long gallery. It was a cavernous stone hallway, damp and dimly lit by high barred windows that allowed only slivers of gray London light to filter through. On either side, the cells were arranged like stalls in a stable. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of weeping, manic laughter and the rhythmic clanking of chains. It was a choir of the damned, singing a song of absolute abandonment. To my left, a man was chained to the wall by an iron collar so tight his neck was rubbed raw, the skin weeping serous fluid that trickled down his chest. He was naked save for a loincloth of filthy burlap. He didn't look at us. His eyes were fixed on a spot in the air 3 feet in front of him, tracking the flight of an invisible insect. Every few seconds he would snap his jaws shut, teeth clicking together with bone-jarring force. "The fly-catcher," Garrick announced, his voice booming over the din like a ringmaster. "Formerly a solicitor of high repute, now he believes he must consume the pestilence of London to save the king." And Elizabeth gasped, pressing closer to me. The crowd behind the velvet rope threw apple cores at him, trying to provoke a reaction. He did not flinch. He simply waited for the next invisible fly. It was the detachment that horrified me later, in the quiet of my own library. At the moment, I felt only a morbid curiosity, a sense of superiority that my own mind was a fortress, impenetrable and sane. I was the observer. They were the specimens. It is a dangerous arrogance to believe oneself immune to the breaking of the mind. We progressed deeper into the bowels of Bethlem. The air grew colder, the stench more acrid, ammonia and despair. We passed a cell where a woman was singing a nursery rhyme in a voice so clear and beautiful, it made the hair on my arms stand up. She was scrubbing the stone floor with her own hair, back and forth, until the scalp bled. "Religious mania," Garrick noted, consulting a small ledger. "Thinks she is washing away the sins of Eve. We bleed her on Tuesdays and Fridays to lower the pulse, but the singing persists." That's when I noticed the woman's hands were not moving in a scrubbing motion, but were frantically trying to dig through the solid flagstones. "Do they ever recover?" Elizabeth asked, her voice trembling. Garrick laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Recover, my dear. This is not a hospital for healing. It is a warehouse for the broken. We keep them from harming themselves or polite society. That is the cure." He stopped before a heavy iron door reinforced with oak beams. "The 4th ward," he whispered theatrically. "The dangerous ward, the violent, the possessed." He unlocked the door with a key that looked large enough to bludgeon a man. Inside, the cells were darker, the stone damp with condensation. Here, the patients were not merely confined, they were restrained with mechanical interventions. I saw a man encased in a rigid leather suit that bound his arms to his sides and his legs together, leaving him to shuffle like a caterpillar. He threw himself against the bars with a dull thud over and over, his face a mask of bruised purple and yellow. "Quiet down, 42!" Garrick struck the bars with his cane. The man recoiled, his eyes wide with a primal fear that transcended madness. "Why 42?" I asked, adjusting my lace cuffs. "Names are a burden they can no longer carry, my lord. Numbers are cleaner, easier for the ledgers." We walked past rows of misery. A boy of no more than 16, strapped to a chair, his head shaved, covered in leech bites. An elderly woman bound in a straight waistcoat, rocking violently. And then, the silence. Near the end of the corridor, the cacophony faded into a heavy, oppressive quiet. This was not the silence of peace, but the silence of exhaustion, of spirits so thoroughly crushed that even screaming seemed a waste of breath. I stopped at cell 14. Unlike the others, the occupant of this cell was not pacing or raging. The figure was huddled in the far corner, almost blending into the shadows. The floor was stone, cold and unyielding. There was no straw, only a thin gray blanket that looked stiff with filth. But what caught my eye, what made me stop, was the sound. Scrape, scrape, scrape. A rhythmic, deliberate sound of metal on stone. "Ah," Garrick said, moving to guide us away. "Best leave this one be. A melancholic, unresponsive for, a decade now, I believe. She does nothing but scratch at the walls, a dull spectacle." "Wait," I said. The air in the corridor seemed to drop 10 degrees. I stepped closer to the bars, ignoring Garrick's warning. The smell here was different. Underneath the rot, there was a faint ghostly scent of lavender. It was impossible. Lavender was the scent of my childhood home, of the linen closets in the east wing of Wessingham Manor. The figure in the corner paused. The scraping stopped. "You there," I called out, my voice echoing in the damp stone chamber. "What are you doing?" The figure turned slowly. It was a woman, skeletal and ragged. Her dress was a collection of rags held together by grime. Her hair was a matted gray nest that obscured her face. But as she shifted, the light from the hallway torch caught her hands. They were raw, the fingernails worn down to the quick bleeding and jagged. In her right hand, she held a sharpened spoon handle. And then I saw the wall behind her. The stone was not bare. It was covered, every inch of it from the floor to the height of a person's reach, in text. Thousands of tiny scratched letters, names, dates, prayers, a chaotic archive carved into the very architecture of her prison. And in the center, carved deeply enough to catch the shadow, was a single word repeated over and over in a spiral. Sparrow. My breath hitched in my chest. Sparrow. It was not a word. It was a name. My name. The nickname given to me by my older sister when I was a boy because I was small and quick. A name no one had spoken in 11 years. Not since Charlotte died in childbirth. Not since we buried her empty casket because her husband, the Baron, told us the fever was contagious and the body had to be interred immediately in the family crypt. The woman in the cell dragged herself forward, the chains on her ankles rattling like dry bones. She lifted her head. The dirt on her face was like a mask, but the eyes were a piercing, familiar blue. One was clouded with a cataract, but the other locked onto mine with a clarity that cut through the madness. She opened her mouth. Her lips were cracked, her teeth mostly gone or broken from the bit. A dry, rasping sound emerged, like dead leaves skittering over pavement. "Alistair," she croaked, "you're late for tea." The cane slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence of the ward. Elizabeth screamed, but her voice sounded miles away. I was staring at a ghost. I was staring at the sister I had mourned for a decade, chained to a wall in hell, holding a spoon she had sharpened into a chisel. "Dr. Garrick," I said, my voice barely a whisper, trembling with a rage that threatened to stop my heart. "Open this door." "My lord, I cannot." "Open this door!" I roared, grabbing the bars with my bare hands, ignoring the filth. "That is Lady Charlotte Pembroke, and if you do not open this door, I will burn this asylum to the ground with you inside it." Garrick paled, fumbling for his keys. But Charlotte, the thing that was Charlotte, did not look at him. She looked only at me. And then, with a terrible shaking hand, she pointed to the wall behind her. "I wrote it down, Sparrow," she whispered. "I wrote it all down so I wouldn't forget. The stones remember." The iron key turned in the lock with a sound like a pistol cocking, a sharp mechanical finality that severed the world of the sane from the stone box before me. Garrick pushed the heavy door inward, the hinges screaming against years of rust and neglect. The air inside the cell did not move. It hung suspended, heavy with the dust of scratching and the ammonia, reek of a bucket that had not been emptied in days. I stepped across the threshold, my polished boots sinking into a layer of grime that coated the floor like black grease. Elizabeth refused to enter, remaining in the corridor with a handkerchief pressed so firmly to her face I feared she might smother herself. I wished I could join her, but the gravitational pull of the woman in the corner was absolute. "Charlotte?" I knelt, heedless of the filth ruining my breeches. Up close, the ruin was absolute. The sister who had taught me to dance the minuet, whose laugh had once filled the solarium of Wessingham Manor, was gone. In her place was a creature of wire and bone, her skin translucent and mapped with blue veins, stretched tight over a skull that seemed too large for her face. She flinched as my hand hovered near her shoulder, a violent jerking spasm that sent a cloud of dust rising from her rags. She did not look at me. Her eyes darted to the corner of the ceiling, tracking the spider webs. "The stone is cold today, Sparrow," she whispered, her voice a dry rattle. "But the stone is honest. It does not lie like the ledger." "She speaks nonsense," Garrick said from the doorway, his voice regaining some of its arrogance now that the initial shock had passed. "The mania is cyclical. She believes she's part of the architecture, a common delusion among the long-term residents. We call it lapidary hysteria." "Get out," I said, not looking back. "My lord, I must insist on safety protocols." "I said get out! Stand guard at the door and let no one enter," I shouted, the sound cracking in the small space. Garrick retreated, the door creaking but remaining ajar. I turned back to Charlotte. I reached out and took her hand. It was cold, the fingers locked into a permanent claw from gripping the spoon handle. "Charlotte, it's Alistair. I'm going to take you home. The carriage is outside." She laughed then, a sound that had no mirth, only jagged edges. "Home? To the Baron? To the nursery with the empty crib?" She pulled her hand away and pressed it against the stone wall. "This is home. These are my sisters." That's when I noticed the dates carved next to the names on the wall went back 100 years. I moved the torch closer to the wall, illuminating the obsession of a decade. The stone was scarred with thousands of lines, a chaotic tapestry of suffering. It was not just names, it was a census of the discarded. Mary Wicks, 1689, spoke against the bishop. Sarah Holt, 1712, refused the bleeding. Jane Doe, 1745, too sad to work. And below them, Charlotte's own contributions, carved with a depth that must have taken months for each letter. Charlotte Pembroke, buried 1783, resurrected never. Baby Thomas, taken, not dead, taken. I froze. Thomas, the name of her stillborn son, the tragedy that had reportedly driven her to a fever death. Charlotte began to rock, her forehead knocking gently against the stone. "He didn't die, Sparrow," he cried. I heard him cry, a strong cry, a living cry. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. But the Baron said a crying heir with a crooked foot was no heir at all. He said the fever took me. He paid the doctor 200 guineas for the death certificate. The room seemed to spin. I grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at me. "Charlotte, listen to me. Are you saying Thomas lived? That Baron Hargrove put you here to dispose of you?" "Dispose?" She tilted her head like a bird considering a worm. No, to cure me, to cure the lie. He said I was mad to hear a dead baby cry. Dr. Garrick agreed. He said the water would wash the sound out of my ears." I moved the torch closer to the wall, illuminating the obsession of a decade. The stone was scarred with thousands of lines, a chaotic tapestry of suffering. It was not just names, it was a census of the discarded. Mary Wicks, 1689, spoke against the bishop. Sarah Holt, 1712, refused the bleeding. Jane Doe, 1745, too sad to work. And below them, Charlotte's own contributions, carved with a depth that must have taken months for each letter. Charlotte Pembroke, buried 1783, resurrected never. Baby Thomas, taken, not dead, taken. I froze. Thomas, the name of her stillborn son, the tragedy that had reportedly driven her to a fever death. Charlotte began to rock, her forehead knocking gently against the stone. "He didn't die, Sparrow," he cried. I heard him cry, a strong cry, a living cry. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. But the Baron said a crying heir with a crooked foot was no heir at all. He said the fever took me. He paid the doctor 200 guineas for the death certificate. The room seemed to spin. I grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at me. "Charlotte, listen to me. Are you saying Thomas lived? That Baron Hargrove put you here to dispose of you?" "Dispose?" She tilted her head like a bird considering a worm. No, to cure me, to cure the lie. He said I was mad to hear a dead baby cry. Dr. Garrick agreed. He said the water would wash the sound out of my ears." "Water," she said. The word was sudden, sharp. "You want water?" I asked, stepping back inside. "No." She scrambled backward, pressing herself into the corner, terror twisting her face into a mask of pure panic. "Not the bath, not the surprise bath. Please, Sparrow, don't let them drop me." I looked at Garrick. What is she talking about? Garrick sighed, as if explaining simple arithmetic to a child. "The surprise bath, my lord. A standard treatment for stubborn mania. The patient is placed on a trap door over a pool of ice water. The door is released without warning. The shock resets the system. It scares the madness out of the blood. You dropped her through a trapdoor into freezing water. Repeatedly, until the symptoms subsided. I looked at my sister. The fear in her eyes wasn't just madness, it was trauma, etched into her nervous system. Every drop of water was a threat. Every sudden noise was a trapdoor opening. "We are leaving," I announced. "Elizabeth, call for the carriage." "My lord, you cannot simply remove a patient." Garrick stepped in front of me. "She is a ward of the institution. Legally, she belongs to the Baron until he signs her release. If you take her, it is kidnapping." I gripped my cane, feeling the heavy gold head. I imagined swinging it. I imagined the sound of Garrick's skull cracking like the porcelain tea sets we used to use at Wessingham. "Let him sign." Charlotte's voice came from the floor. She was tracing the spiral of my name again. "Let him sign. The Baron signs everything. He signed the baby away. He signed me away." She looked up, and for a second the fog cleared completely. "He signed the death certificate before the baby was born, Alistair. The date. Check the date." I froze. The ledger. I looked at the entry again. The date of admission was August 14th, but Thomas was born, supposedly died, on August 16th. The Baron had committed her 2 days before she even gave birth. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just convenient disposal of a grieving wife. This was premeditated erasure. He had planned to lock her away before the child arrived. Why? To hide the deformity? To seize her dowry without the interference of an heir? Suddenly, Charlotte let out a shriek that tore through the stagnant air. She convulsed, her back arching off the stone floor, her heels drumming a frantic rhythm against the flagstones. Foam gathered at the corners of her mouth. "It's coming!" she screamed. The water's rising! Can't you hear it? It's in the walls!" "Seizure!" Garrick barked, snapping his fingers at two burly attendants who had materialized in the hallway. "Restrain her! Bring the bit! Do not touch her!" I shouted, but they pushed past me. I watched in horror as they pinned my sister to the filth. One sat on her legs, the other wrenched her jaw open and jammed a piece of leather-wrapped wood between her teeth to keep her from biting her tongue. She thrashed, her eyes rolling back into her head, a guttural noise trapped in her throat. "She is dangerous, my lord!" Garrick yelled over the commotion. "This is why she is here. You cannot handle this. You are a gentleman, not a jailer." I stood paralyzed, the admission ledger clutched in my hand like a shield that offered no protection. I watched the men I considered beneath my station handle my own flesh and blood like livestock. And in that moment, the veneer of my world cracked. The velvet, the gold, the powdered wigs. It was all just a thin layer of paint over a rotting structure of cruelty. Charlotte's eyes found mine one last time before the seizure took her completely. They were pleading, not for mercy, for witness. The spoon slipped from her hand and skittered across the floor, coming to rest against my boot. The edge was sharpened to a razor point. I watched the attendants lift my sister like a sack of wet grain, their hands indifferent to the fragility of her bones. The seizure had passed, leaving her limp, a rag doll with a pulse, but Dr. Garrick was not satisfied. The treatment had to be completed. The medical logic of the time dictated that the heat of the mania must be extinguished by the shock of the cold. They did not carry her back to the bed. They dragged her toward the heavy double doors at the end of the ward, her bare feet trailing through the muck of the corridor, leaving two long, clean streaks in the filth. "Stop!" I lunged forward, but the sheer mechanics of the asylum were in motion, a machine that could not be halted by a mere shout. "It is for her own good, my lord," Garrick shouted, keeping pace with the attendants. "The humors are boiled. If we do not cool the brainstem immediately, the epilepsy will turn to apoplexy. Do you want her to die on the floor?" It was the ultimate weapon of the institution, the claim of saving life while destroying it. I followed, Elizabeth sobbing in the distance, abandoned near the entrance. We descended a spiral stone staircase, the air growing wetter, the smell changing from rot to mold. We entered the hydrotherapy chamber. It was a cathedral of torture, disguised as a bathhouse. The room was tiled in white, stained yellow by years of mineral water and bodily fluids. In the center stood the apparatus, a wooden chair suspended by a pulley system over a deep lead-lined tank sunk into the floor. The water inside was black and still, coated with a thin film of ice, but it was the sound that froze my blood, the dripping, a constant, rhythmic echoing that sounded like a clock counting down the seconds of a life. "Strap her in," Garrick commanded. They dumped Charlotte into the surprised chair. She was barely conscious, her head lolling, saliva stringing from her lip. As the leather straps were tightened across her chest and wrists, her eyes fluttered open. She saw the water below. The scream that tore from her throat was not human. It was the sound of a trapped animal realizing the trap is shut. "No, not the dark water. The baby is in there. The baby will drown." "Administer the shock," Garrick said, checking his pocket watch. "That's when I saw the water in the tank ripple, though nothing had touched it yet." "Garrick, I swear by God," I started, stepping onto the wet tiles. The attendant pulled the lever. The floor beneath the chair dropped away. There was a splash, violent and heavy, and then silence. My sister disappeared into the freezing blackness. The water churned, bubbling furiously as she thrashed beneath the surface, restrained by the chair, unable to swim, unable to breathe. 10 seconds, Garrick counted calmly. 15. "Bring her up," I screamed, grabbing the attendant by the collar and throwing him aside. I grabbed the winch handle myself. The metal was slippery with condensation. "She's drowning." 20 seconds. "It must be 20 to reset the nerves," Garrick insisted, though he took a step back from my fury. I cranked the winch, my muscles screaming, the gears grinding against the rust. Slowly, agonizingly, The chair rose from the pit. Charlotte emerged from the water. She was silent. Her skin was blue, her hair plastered to her skull like seaweed. She did not gasp. She did not cough. She sat perfectly still, water pouring from her rags, her head hanged forward. I rushed to the edge of the pit and unbuckled the straps with fumbling, shaking fingers. "Charlotte? Charlotte?" She fell forward into my arms, cold as a corpse. I dragged her onto the tiled floor, patting her face, checking for breath. For a terrifying moment, there was nothing. Then, a convulsive heave. She vomited water and bile onto the pristine white tiles, coughing until she wheezed. I wrapped my velvet coat around her shivering frame. I looked up at Garrick, who was watching with clinical detachment. "You see?" Garrick gestured vaguely. "The mania is gone. She is docile." "She is half dead," I snarled. I lifted her into my arms. She weighed nothing. 11 years of starvation disguised as care. "I'm taking her, now. And if you or your men try to stop me, I will kill you. That is not a threat, doctor. It is a diagnosis." Garrick looked at the ledger still tucked under my arm, the proof of his corruption. He looked at the rage in my eyes. He calculated the odds. "Very well," he sneered. "But when she burns down your manor, do not come crying to Bedlam. We do not accept returns." The walk to the carriage was a blur of horrified faces. We passed through the penny gallery, the spectators parting like the Red Sea before the sight of a lord carrying a soaked, broken skeleton. We emerged into the London afternoon. The sun was blinding. The noise of the street, vendors, horses, life, seemed assaultive after the tomb-like silence of the ward. I laid her on the velvet squabs of the carriage. Elizabeth sat on the opposite side, pressing herself against the door, terrified of the woman who used to be her friend. "Home," I told the driver. "Fast." As the carriage rattled over the cobblestones, Charlotte opened her eyes. She did not look at me. She did not look at the city passing by the window. She stared at the ceiling of the carriage, her finger tracing a pattern on the velvet upholstery. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Her fingernail, broken and bloody, worked rhythmically against the expensive fabric. "Charlotte," I whispered, "you're safe. You're free." She didn't blink. "The stone is soft here," she murmured, "but I can still write on it. I have to write it down before the water comes back." But the ink on the ledger in my lap had begun to bleed, staining my breeches like dried blood. 6 months later. The Wessingham estate is quiet. We do not receive guests anymore. Elizabeth left 3 months ago. She said the sound of the scratching kept her awake. She said she couldn't look at Charlotte without seeing the water. I sit in the library, the fire crackling in the hearth. Charlotte sits in the corner, in the finest silk dress London could produce. Her hair is washed and brushed, though the white patches where the stress destroyed the pigment will never fade. She is physically healthy. The sores have healed. The cough is gone. But she is not here. We could not save her. We only moved her cell. She does not speak to me. She does not play the pianoforte. She spends her days moving from room to room, and everywhere she goes, she leaves her mark. The mahogany dining table, the oak wainscoting in the hallway, the plaster of the nursery walls, all of them are covered in tiny, intricate scratches. I've had to dismiss the servants. They were frightened by the vandalism. But I cannot stop her. I cannot bind her hands again. I watch her now by the window. She is using a silver letter opener I foolishly left out. She is carving into the windowsill. I walk over quietly and look at her work. It is a list. Garrick, the Baron, Elizabeth, Sparrow. Next to each name, she is carving a date, not a birth date, not an admission date. She finishes my name. She pauses, the silver blade glinting in the firelight. Then, with a steady hand, she carves the date, October 31st, 1794. I look at the calendar on my desk. Today is October 30th. She turns to me, and for the first time in 6 months, she smiles. It is the smile of the woman in the cell. "The stone remembers, Alistair," she whispers, "and tomorrow, the stone gets fed."